feel like a lot of you don't know me, so I'll say this is made up. And about 10 minutes over. Okay. So, springtime in New York. I was in the city for a big finance interview. I'd asked my econ professor to put me up for the coveted Goldman Sachs internship that summer. He resisted because I had some of the worst grades in the class. You've got no aptitude for this subject. We're on the Pareto principle and you're still grappling with supply and demand. You are the curve, Cece. I said, well, I've noticed that some of the students in this class supplied you with ADHD medication during the fall stimulant shortage. And so I demand that I'm one of the individuals put up for an interview. Hey, I guess I'm catching on. The professor tried again. Listen, I don't think you're going to like the finance crowd. I stood my ground. Well, I'd like to learn that for myself, sir. So I and a handful of students got to take the train into NYC for a day and some change to interview for the Sachs role. They put us up at the Best Western Manhattan. I roomed with a guy named Steven because he and I were the only ones who were not already friends. Steven had the best marks in our class, but he never figured out how to wear pants in a way that didn't show the outline of his penis. I'm not a penis expert, but I do know that many people are able to hide the outline of their penis in pants or even spandex. So I figured Steven didn't care, didn't know that it was happening, or he had a very big penis that he was unable to hide. I thought to myself, Steven may have a knack for all this, but I bet Goldman Sachs doesn't want someone walking around their offices with a penis silhouette. I had some hope. But the morning of our interviews, Steven came down to breakfast in a well-tailored suit, no bulge. He'd also wiped the dry spit off his face that seemed to always be there. I guess Steven did know how to put himself together. He just decided that none of us were worth cleaning up for. I became very aware of the ways in which my suit hugged me all wrong. The way my pants ungracefully landed on my Zara loafers. Blackmailing my professor might have all been for naught. The 6 of us interviewed one after the other. An HR coordinator named Eric interviewed me. He came out into the lobby and tried to subtly look me up and down, but I saw he did it. And when he did it, he sort of grimace smiled at the sight of me. Like one does when your grandmother asks you for a kiss on the cheek, but you know she's going to turn a bit so you get the mouth. I was thrown by Eric's reaction to me and the excitement of being at Goldman Sachs. I shook his hand a bit too hard and a bit too long. I felt him pull away from me, but my brain wasn't sending the release signals to the muscles in my arm, so instead of letting go, I pulled him further in for a sort of bro hug. On the way out of the hug, my cheek grazed his hair. Your hair is really hard and spiky, I said. He just looked at me. I said, in a good way, I assured him. From there, he seemed unwilling to lead the way to his office, so I said, shall we? I tried to come back from our wayward introduction, but we just weren't able to build up a casual and fun rapport. He asked me a few questions, why I wanted to work there, but after about 15 minutes, it was done. I exited and passed through the reception area of the offices where it seemed I would not be spending my summer. None of the other candidates had waited for me. I tried to pick myself up, say, hey, it's competitive out there, and maybe next year. There are other firms apart from Goldman Sachs. I should at least enjoy the big city while I'm here. So I texted the trip group chat, the Nut Sacks as I'd named it, to see what was going on that evening. No one responded. When I got back to the room, I asked Steven directly, but he was evasive. Just gonna see where I end up, I think. Okay. So after a bit of Googling, I decided to head to the famed Bemelman Piano Bar at the Carlisle Hotel. I learned this later, but Anthony Bourdain once said of the Bemelman Bar that if you were insider trading, having an affair, or just wanted to be alone, that was the place to go, because you wouldn't run into anyone you knew. It was a slow night at the Bemelman. As I scanned the bar for the best spot to drink away the day and enjoy the music, a voice called out to me, "This seat's open if you'd like." I looked around to find the face of the offer, and then I saw her. Jesus Christ, I stared. Your Highness? She nodded and introduced herself. It was, in fact, Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, George VI's second-born, second in line to the throne from ages 6 to 18, just behind Queen Elizabeth. The rebel princess, as she was known. She was alone, drinking whiskey. I said I didn't want to impose, but she gestured to the seat again in a way that made it seem like it was more of a command than an offering. So I performed a small curtsy and slid into her booth. Margaret flagged a waiter and asked me what I'd like to drink. I'll have what you're having, I said. As she ordered, I stole a better look at her. Her hair was folded down flatly, sexily across her head into a side part, with curls pinned to the sides of her dome. Her eyes sparkled like they were lit by candlelight, but there were no candles in the bar. She smelled like lavender and rosemary, which I'd later learn were the front-facing notes of her signature scent, Oscar, by Oscar de la Renta. The waiter placed my drink on the table and she raised her glass to me. I went in to clink her cup, but she pulled the glass back and shook her head. You do not clink, you simply raise. I nodded, my heart rate increasing. I asked her what brought her to NYC, and she gave a vague answer. You know, business of the crown. I asked her if she liked America. I asked her if she liked America and what we'd done with the place. I thought that was kind of good. She said that she thought it was a bit much. Probably didn't need to go so far south nor west, but she enjoyed LA. Though I, of course, agreed with her that we'd gotten a bit carried away with expansion, I wanted to point out that England couldn't even handle the Northeast, but I bit my tongue. And you, she asked? An interview in finance at Goldman. She nodded and looked me up and down, just like the interviewer had. You don't strike me as an economist. Well, I'm not yet, I responded. She said, well, are you long or are you short? I said, about 5'6", medium, I guess. I meant on the S&P. What? I was lost. Oh dear, she said. Princess Margaret lit a cigarette. Isn't there anything else you might like to do? What a stupid question. Of course, there were lots of things I'd like to be doing instead. I couldn't make heads or tails of an Excel spreadsheet. I don't know what dividends are, and I didn't understand why you can't just print more dollars, no matter how many times people explain it. But we all need to learn about Excel and find a way to make a living. I don't even know what that is, she said. Well, you wouldn't have to. You're a princess, I shot back. You probably never had to learn how to do a thing in your life. I knew it was too mean right as it left my lips. But I don't think it warranted her putting her cigarette out of my hand like she did. Ah, I screamed. Now people were staring. Margaret got up from the table and strode towards the exit. I tried to cover. Tony Blair always gets her going. I got up and followed her out of the bar. I looked around the hotel lobby and spotted her waiting for the elevator. When I reached her, I apologized profusely. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I'm sure you know how to do lots of things that I don't. Like the clinking thing. That's super cool. The elevator arrived. She stepped in and I followed. I tried to make her understand once and for all before we'd have to say goodnight what my problem was, what I meant. Okay, here's the truth. If I work at Goldman, everyone's going to have to respect me. They can't call me a weirdo or a freak, and if they did, I wouldn't care. If I worked there, I'd be a part of the fold. You know, take meetings, be in elevators like this all the time, say things like, I have a guy for that. She didn't respond. I followed her to her room and figured that's where our meeting would end, but she held the door open for me. The room was grand, filled with gift baskets and bottles of champagne. Something a bit odd was that it looked like she'd also hung a British flag across her headboard and a banner underneath it that said, once a subject, always a subject. But I had already put my foot in my mouth and I decided not to comment on that. Princess Margaret poured herself another drink. You can have the champagne. I won't drink it. It's too sweet. That's very kind, I said, and started piling bottles by the door to take with me. Could you do that in a minute? She said. Yes, ma'am. I sat down on the couch in front of the television. Now listen, I'm trying to help you, she said. She shared that up until age 6, she and her sister were very, very close, inseparable. They seemed to understand everything about each other. That all changed when her uncle, King Edward VIII, gave up his right to the throne. Their father became king, and her sister the heir to the throne. From there, her sister spent a lot of time learning about the world and her duties, which was something Margaret couldn't be a part of. She missed her sister and envied her to some degree, but as she watched Elizabeth being held to an impossible standard by herself and others, she realized that being second was a gift. She could travel the world, misbehave with celebrities, marry and divorce a bisexual photographer, colonize part of a Caribbean island with her rich friends just to host parties. Being second and not being queen was sick. It's a gift that you won't fit into that world, because now you can actually enjoy the world. Do you see? I said, well, I don't really have an island, but I see your point. She asked me again what else I might want to do with my life. I got a bit cagey and said that was hard to explain. And I never told anyone about it. She said, well, why don't you try? I looked around the room. There was a large fruit basket on the table. I got up and walked over to it and grabbed 3 apples and a banana out of the basket. I took a deep breath. I put the banana between my teeth, threw one apple in the air, then another and another. I juggled them about medium height. Then, when the time was right, I let the banana drop from my mouth to the floor, and I started to my hands, and I started juggling with all 4 fruits. For the final part of my act, I dropped the banana and began furiously taking bites of each apple as it would land in my left hand. I juggled and bit, until all that was left of each apple was the core. I caught all 3 cores, bowed, and threw them in the trash. I found a towel in the bathroom, wiped my mouth, and said, "Well, you asked." I finally looked over at Princess Margaret. She started clapping. Now, why would you waste a talent like that? I smiled. I walked over and sat next to her on the bed, and then something came over me, a renewed confidence or maybe a reverence. I leaned in and I kissed her. "Oh, Margaret," I said. She pulled away and reminded me to call her ma'am. "Yes, ma'am," I said. And I don't want to further divulge any of the royal family secrets, but that night we did make love. And as sometimes happens after a night together, we never saw each other again. But I never again saw the inside of a financial district skyscraper either.